Hi everyone, and welcome back to another Tech Bytes review. Today we are going to be reviewing the Logitech Trackman Marble. This is a very standard trackball that you can find everywhere from Target to Best Buy, even Office Depot, and they usually range somewhere in the realm of $15 to $25 depending on sales going on at the time. While it is a basic trackball, it does have a lot of very good characteristics and a few unfortunate critical flaws that really impact its day-to-day usability. We'll cover that in the rest of the review, but let's go ahead and kick things off with build quality. We'll step into usability and then finally wrap this up with a summary and go forward recommendations for who this may be a good trackball for in the future. Now, before we continue on with the review, I did want to take a moment to remind you to subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and if you like this video, please be sure to hit the like button. It helps me out a lot. Also, we are kicking off a new series called Morning Tech Talk, which will cover everything from tech news to programming tutorials and all kinds of really cool technology related things. So please consider subscribing if you want more of that content. It should be released here very shortly. All right, let's get back into the review. Kick things off with build quality like we usually do. Let's go ahead and look at the chassis, this outer injection molded shell that the Logitech Trackman Marble has on it. You can see the design itself is very unique. This is kind of the OG, the original weird little T-shaped design that it has going on here. It does make it so it's ambidextrous. You could use it left-handed or right-handed, which is really nice. It kind of has this prominent hump in the center, but it's not too much to where it forces your hand into a certain kind of shape, although it does tend to lend itself more towards a claw-shaped approach, but it definitely doesn't lock you into it. The material of the shell itself is some very durable, what I assume to be PBT plastic. The entire top and bottom housing are injection molded, but they are two separate pieces. So it's not one complete unit, but it is very solid and very sturdy. And for such a budget trackball, really not going more than $25, it's actually pretty incredible how nice it feels. The case itself, it's very smooth, but just slightly textured, almost a little grainy, but not in a bad way. It just feels like a very solid product for something that doesn't feel out of place with a $60 price tag or higher. So the fact that this could be had for $25 or less is nothing short of incredible. It does feel a little light, but not necessarily in a bad way. I would say it's a little bit heavier than the Logitech M570 is, and that's a pretty light trackball. So this one does have a little bit more weight to it, and honestly, there's no flex, no bend at all. The chassis itself is really fantastic. I can't recommend it enough. While the design is very simple, it's done very well. Absolutely no complaints from the upper housing and the chassis perspective. If we look at the back, there's really nothing to note. This is not battery powered. It's a standard USB cable. The cable is very long, which is maybe a little bit of a minor complaint, but it's definitely not a deal breaker. Now, short of the USB cable and a hole for some of the nasty stuff that tends to cling to the trackball to fall out of, there's really not much else going on the back side. You can see there's 3 screws to take it apart, although I believe there is a 4th screw underneath this this sticker here, right, as well. So it's not the easiest to take apart, but it's also not the worst. It's just has that little hidden safety screw right there. So if you did ever want to resolder switches, it's definitely possible. They just don't make it as easy as like the X-Keys L-Track with their 3 screws all perfectly visible. It is worth noting that this is not meant to pop the ball out. You can see it's much smaller than my finger. This is actually used solely for the purpose of having that nasty junk fall out of the trackball hole so it doesn't gunk up the ball. The ball itself is easily removed by just pulling it out with 2 fingers, but it does stay in there enough that you can see it doesn't fall out when you tip it over. So in terms of the ball housing and the way that this hole works, it's a little bit different than most, but it also doesn't require a bigger hole. In fact, I much prefer this design with the ball being a little bit more exposed than I do having to mess with a hole to pop it out in the bottom. Jumping into the buttons, you can see there's only 4 of them. There's a left click, a right click, a back arrow, and a forward arrow. It's my guess that they all use the same cheap Chinese Omron switches. That's what all Logitech devices are using these days. For better or for worse, that's just what we're stuck with. The switches themselves feel great. One thing that I would actually like to note, normally when you get longer buttons like this, there's one spot where it's much easier to depress the switch than there is on some of the others. Like you see this even in really expensive trackballs like the CST L-Track or the Kensington Expert. where depending on where you press it, it's going to be more difficult or easier. In this case, that's not really an issue. This is the same amount of force requirement no matter where you press it, which is really, really fantastic, especially given that there's only one switch that exists per button. This one obviously is very easy to press, but these, no matter where you click it, you're going to get the same kind of uniform amount of pressure required to actually actuate the underlying switch. So it's a fantastic way that they built this. It just lends itself to feel a lot more expensive, a lot more premium than it really is. Also, the backwards and forwards arrows are phenomenal. In a lot of cases, even the MX Ergo, which is a Logitech product, the buttons here for the backwards and forwards arrows are very, very mushy and they're not really satisfying at all. That's not the case with these. These are full-blown Omron switches. They're very, very clicky. They feel snappy. They feel great. The 4 buttons that this offers are all fantastic. Moving into the biggest critical issue that this device has, the lack of scroll wheel. That means there's no scroll wheel whatsoever. There's also no middle mouse button click. I've never reviewed a device that didn't have something as basic as a scroll wheel, and it unfortunately is a killer for this device. It horribly impacts the day-to-day usability of this device, and we'll get into that more in the usability section, but it is worth noting that somebody had a bit of an issue on the design standpoint when they chose to exclude that from the overall device. It's really unfortunate because everything else about this is so perfect. From an ergonomics design, it doesn't make any assumptions about the way your hand should fit or the way that you should be operating this device. So if you wanted to hold it more towards the back and use it as a fingertip operated trackball, that's perfectly acceptable. If you wanted to use it somewhere like this, like more of a palm operated trackball, you still have access to the buttons. So I honestly prefer this approach to design than I do the form-fitted nature of a lot of the trackballs these days. This really allows you to figure out what the most comfortable position is for your hand, and from a design standpoint, it's incredible. I wish more companies would produce more products with that in mind instead of trying to make it form-fitted to their hand and try to make assumptions about how the user would actually use it. So from a build quality standpoint, this is absolutely a major thumbs up with a horrible critical design flaw that will really, really impact our usability. But from a purely design standpoint and from a purely build quality standpoint, this is one of the best devices. And the fact that it's only $25 is nothing short of incredible on Logitech's part. Moving into the usability side of things is unfortunately where I have to give this product a massive thumbs down. We've already mentioned that for whatever reason, Logitech has decided to exclude a scroll wheel, which therefore means there's also no middle mouse button click from the overall device. And that just kills its day-to-day usability. Even with that, though, the rest of the device is extremely satisfying to use. And I did use this as a daily driver for every bit of 3 to 4 months. I know it doesn't look like it, but this saw very heavy use. And I just could not get past the lack of the scroll wheel. Everything these days, whether it's Excel or Visual Studio or even Outlook for email and stuff, is going to have some type of website or some type of user interface that requires you to scroll. And while there are software alternatives that you can use to kind of simulate a middle mouse button for this, it's just not a very good replacement for having a physical wheel on the device. So if you do see yourself as a heavy Excel user or a heavy Outlook user or really just a heavy computer user, this is probably not going to be ideal for you. It's really a terrible, terrible shame because everything else about this is so, so good. Honestly, what kept me using this for so long was the fact that I could really adjust my hand placement and the device would work just the same. And what I mean by that is if I wanted to hold it this way because maybe my hand got a little tired from holding it back here, I could do that and I could still hit all the buttons that I required. Or I could hold it back here a little bit if I wanted to rest my wrist on the desk. It really makes no assumptions about how you want to use it, and that means that you can actually use it in more ways than just the predefined way that Logitech originally intended you to. So the design, short of the scroll wheel missing, is incredible. It's so close to being so good, and honestly, there is no excuse why in the year 2022 Logitech is still manufacturing the Trackman Marble without a scroll wheel. There's just no excuse for it. Day-to-day use usually sees your hand in this type of motion. If you're right-handed, you'll usually have it somewhere off to the side, and that allows you to kind of quickly rotate the ball like this, and then you can hit usually the right mouse button with the middle part of your ring finger here, and then the thumb is used to operate the left mouse button click and also the back arrow. So it is a little bit of an interesting setup, but it feels very, very natural. It's almost like you're shaking somebody's hand. So if you were to look at it from the side, it's like a very friendly handshake that you're doing with your mouse, and it feels really good. As far as scrolling, there's absolutely no issues. The bearings don't seem to have any form of stiction. The ball rolls very, very fluid, and it's buttery smooth, and I have zero complaints, and I love it so much. I just wish it had a scroll wheel. So unfortunately on the usability side, because it's missing such a critical piece, it gets a massive thumbs down. I struggle to use it. I struggle to use it from everything from day-to-day web browsing to gaming to anything. I just could not find a place where the lack of scroll wheel didn't impact my day-to-day activities. Now, finally, to wrap up the review of the Logitech Trackman Marble, I would give this trackball a solid 5 out of 10, and that is 100% due to the missing scroll wheel feature that this device really should have. If this were to have a scroll wheel, it would immediately jump up to an 8 or a 9. I give nothing a perfect rating, but this is just about as close as you could get if it had a scroll wheel. Everything else about it is really fantastic. It's just really unfortunate that they skimped on something that's so critical to modern computer usage. Everything else from the ball action to the buttons themselves, they just feel very, very good, and they feel a lot more expensive than what they actually are, which is really incredible on Logitech's part. So as far as recommending this to a user, I would say probably not. Your average user is going to be more annoyed with the missing scroll wheel than they are going to be impressed by the other features that the trackball offers. And that concludes today's review, everyone. Thank you for watching. Please stay tuned. There's a lot more content, both product reviews, tech news, different things like that are going to be coming down the pipeline. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. And I will see you guys in the next video.